My guest today is Vanessa Foerster. She's a mental endurance coach for high-achieving endurance athletes who are looking to hit their next-level performance faster. She went from consistently underperforming to a podium finisher and Kona qualifier all in 1 year. And Vanessa teaches how to drop the self-doubt, fuel radical self-confidence, and build the mental endurance to race stronger and faster. I came across Vanessa when she did a very entertaining and informative, I thought, interview with, I guess, our mutual friend, Alex Larson. And right away, I knew that I had to have her on the podcast. So welcome to the TriDoc podcast, Vanessa.
Thank you so much for having me, Jeff. I appreciate it. Happy to be here.
Awesome. So tell me, I guess, right from the top about your history in triathlon. How did you come to the sport? What made you decide that you could do more?
I love this question because I feel like every year it kind of evolves to be a slightly different version of what brought me here. But I think one of my favorite things about my past in sport is that it doesn't span very far. I didn't grow up playing sport. I actually in high school, my chosen activity of choice was speech and debate. So I was that kid. I did mock trial middle school, speech and debate in high school, and then went to college and thought, you know what, I kind of want to try this whole athlete thing. Let's see what happens here. And so I knew going to college, I went to the University of Georgia, that I wanted to pick up a sport. And I was between flag football and rowing. And my mom was like, I want you to play a real sport. So definitely choose rowing. So that was my entry into sport at all. You know, growing up, I played a little bit of sports here and there, but never long enough to get good, which is the opposite of my husband. He's a lifelong soccer player and just did it forever and ever. So, I was a collegiate rower, and it was such an eye-opening experience for me just to be a part of a team. It's such an amazing team sport, but also to push myself in a way I hadn't before. So I'm so grateful to that experience in college because it opened my eyes to what it means to find limits within myself that I didn't know were there before. And when I left rowing in my third year of college, I decided to pick up running because, my husband will not like that I say this, but we know how to run because it's just faster walking. He's a PT and a running specialist, and he's like, that's not actually true. There are mechanics to running. It's not faster walking. But that was my thought process back then. So I picked up running, and in the process of my first half marathon, I thought, I think I'll do a sprint. That sounds fun. You just do 3 sports, and that's cool. So I did my first sprint triathlon, and that was in 2007. And I quickly fell in love. I fell in love with the community, with multisport, with the people around it, with the challenge of it. And I said, I want to do more of this. This feels right up my alley. I think I can get better at this. And I actually fell into long course pretty quickly because I was living, I went to the University of Georgia. I was living in Atlanta, and the Atlanta Triathlon Club is a fantastic group that just invited me in. I just immersed myself in the whole community of it. And you know what it's like when you're around other people, long course triathletes, you kind of lose, I feel like the sight of reality that doing things like marathons and half Ironmans and Ironmans is actually not normal. But I just fell right in. I was like, this is amazing. I want to do all the things. So I picked up long course by 2010. That was my first half Ironman. And then 2011 was my first Ironman, which is 10 years ago this weekend. So I love the timing of this podcast because I'm racing Ironman Arizona on Sunday, and that'll be the celebration of my first Ironman 10 years ago, also in Arizona. So that's my journey in,
That's awesome.
2 minutes.
Well, I have a couple of things I want to ask in there. So what was your swim background? I mean, you spent time on the water as a rower.
I did. Yeah.
Where did you come from in swimming?
I am an adult learned swimmer for sure. I knew how to swim, but for that first triathlon, I went to the pool 3 times. I think maybe the week before the race, very close to the race. And I thought I can make it. I won't drown, but I definitely didn't have a proficient background in swimming, but the thing that has always been true for me is that I'm willing to try. I'm willing to put myself in the arena. I'm willing to go for it, even if I'm not the best at it. And that's true now. That was true then. And so swimming has been the biggest journey for me in terms of my development as an athlete. And I mean that both physically and mentally, because, you know, you spoke to what I do for work. I'm a mental endurance coach. And for me, my swim was the thing that what I struggled with the most in terms of like holding myself back. And when it's the first part of the race, it definitely bleeds into the rest of the race. So I didn't have a very big background in swimming, but I was willing to try. And then when I fell in love with the sport, I thought, okay, I should probably do this more. I should probably train, learn how to swim, get better at technique. And it's been a process for sure. Now I am coached by Haley Chura, who is a 2-time Olympic qualifier. So I have definitely more tools in my tool belt, but I was seeking those out because I really wanted to change the game for myself in the swim background.
Yeah, and I'm looking at your swim times, and they're quite impressive in the way that they march ever downward. This past May in St. George, 31 minutes. That's a very fast swim. So that's a testament to your hard work and obviously to your coach's influence on you as well. So kudos for that, because as a kindred adult learner swimmer, I know how hard it is to make strides in that sphere of the race. It's really difficult. What made you decide, or at what point did you decide that you weren't content being kind of middle of the pack and you wanted to see yourself up on the podium? Because everybody, I think, goes through a different kind of journey to that point. Not everybody gets there, but some people, you know, you did. And I'm interested in what sort of flipped that switch for you.
Yeah, that switch definitely flipped for me. I think I was in process of it for a couple years, but like the real switch happened in 2018 when I did Ironman Chattanooga for the first time, because I was also in process of doing my own personal self-development journey. And when I was studying, you know, just about what it means to create a life that you love, or be really deliberate in your choices and be intentional with how you're living, and, you know, just creating a greater scope for those things, I brought the attention to this thing that I spend so much time doing called triathlon. You know, it was a lifestyle for me. And I thought, I wonder what it would be like if I was very deliberate in choosing exactly what I wanted to accomplish in the sport of triathlon, instead of keeping it very nebulous and just like wanting to make this gradual improvement, which I realized I was doing because I was in fear. And I was playing that safe game of like, well, if I'm just like, I keep chugging along, you know, eventually I'll get better, instead of being really clear and intentional with like, no, this is what I really want, because this is what's going to raise the bar for me. And so I made that choice in the year 2018 to 2019, where I did Ironman Chattanooga both years. And that was a really important year for me to address how I was approaching all of my training. Like, and I just mean that holistically, like training, recovery, sleep, nutrition, all of the things. And if I made the conscious and deliberate choices on purpose in terms of like how I set my goals, then what would that change for me? And could I really accomplish what I wanted to do? And so that was the whole like kind of premise behind 2018 to 2019, where I set what I call an impossible goal. I did that on purpose to kind of trick the brain a little bit, but I set the impossible goal to win my age group at Ironman Chattanooga, having not been on a podium before. That was the switch for me.
Wow. And that's like a pretty big jump too. You know, a lot of people, as you say, you know, would make it more, you know, maybe top 15, top 10 kind of thing, and then sort of progress from there. And you went all in.
I went all in.
I like
kind
that.
of my personality.
What was your sort of epiphany about how, you know, mental endurance seems to be so integral, or at least important for you, and now you pass it on to others? I'm curious how you came to that decision or that discovery.
In that year, or just in general?
Whenever it was. I mean, you refer on your website to how having the sort of the revised way that you approached your training mentally seemed to be the thing that made you able to take that jump. And I'm curious, is at what point did you recognize that it maybe wasn't all physical, that there was something, you know, above the neck that was getting in the way of your success?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think we could tie it back to that same time when that switch flipped, because I recognize that every choice that we make, every action that we take stems from what's happening above the neck, right? So what I'm doing physically in my training is only going to be as good as what's happening between my ears. So I had to pay attention to all of my limiting beliefs, everything that I believed about myself, what I call my self-concept as an athlete, which is like who I am, what I believe about myself, but also how I interact in the world, and addressing things like, for me, coming back to the swim, right? We talked about being an adult learned swimmer. And for so long, that was the place where I've never felt good enough. I never felt like I could ever be as good as them, whoever them is. At the time, you know, I was in master's groups, and now I swim with Haley Chura and other people that have been swimming their entire lives. And believing those things about myself really held back my ability to make true progress and really hit that next level. Like I could make incremental, but it was releasing that allowed me to make bigger jumps faster.
Now, you talk a lot about mental toughness, and you talk about that being the key. But, you know, I think there's also some truth to the fact that not everybody can set that goal of winning their age group is going to win their age group, because there's got to be something to the physical as well.
Yeah, well, I didn't actually win my age group.
Regardless of what it is.
Yeah.
I mean, I know, like I have athletes come to me and say, my goal is to make it to Kona. And I'm like, that's a laudable goal, but I think we have a long way to go before we can get there. I mean, they could be the most positive, most lack self-doubt, in this case, potentially overconfident. I guess that's what I'm trying to get at. I am a firm believer that your mental state plays into your performance, no doubt. But I wonder how you sort of view the weighting of, you know, the amount of physical training, the amount of physical fitness you bring to an event, and then your attitude. I definitely believe they're complementary. I'm just curious, you know, I mean, if you have somebody who simply is not putting in the training, I don't think all the mental toughness in the world is going to help them. So I'm curious how you kind of put those together.
Yeah, I think there's an accountability piece 100% of the time, right? Like what I teach is about emotional health and taking responsibility for our emotions and how we show up in the world. And if you're not doing the training, you're absolutely not going to hit the goal. But hitting the goal or setting the goal in the first place can be the thing that allows you to rise up and be like, this is how I want to show up in the world. I want to make these choices. I want to commit to my training at a whole new level. Let's go.
And I think back on my own experience as an adult learner swimmer who came to triathlon and was in triathlon for a very long time as a very content kind of middle of the pack guy. And then I had my own reason for switch flipping to get to realize that, you know, I could do better. And I know of what you speak when you talk about the self-doubt and everything else, is because we show up at these events and we look around us, and it's very easy to be psyched out just by the appearance of so many other athletes who are clearly in very, very peak form and look very confident and have all the gear and everything else. And it's easy to be overcome with imposter syndrome and think, well, what am I doing here? I don't belong. How could I have such a goal? So what are some of the techniques that you use to try and help your athletes overcome those things? Yeah,
so two things just popped into mind. First and foremost, there's a quote by Simon Sinek. He says, we can something like, we can achieve more when we chase the dream, not the competition. And I think that's so powerful because of what you're speaking about. We get caught up in the compare and despair because we spend the time we should be focusing on ourselves, focusing on other people, going outside, going to the external instead of focusing on the internal, which is so, so important if we can be aware of it and redirect it, especially in the last 4 to 6 weeks before a big race. I believe that is when we're the most vulnerable to be looking outside of ourselves, and we've got to bring it back in. We've got to focus on what's been going well in our training. I do a thing with my athletes where we create a training bank because we always think we're going to remember. We never remember. So we go back and we log everything, not just the metrics. It's not about what pace did we hold, what watts did we hold. It's how are we feeling? Where can we derive that confidence? Where did we overcome something that we didn't think was possible before? That kind of thing. And that's what we can draw on, because that emotion is what's really important on race day. Because we're not really racing for a medal or a t-shirt or a hat. We're racing for that sense of accomplishment and success with that feeling. And we're cultivating that all through our training. We just sometimes forget to see it.
Right. And, when you talk about setting these goals, and you said you set yourself a goal that was very, very high, do you also work with athletes to set kind of different goals for the same event? Like, for example, I'll work with my athletes and say, okay, this is our primary goal. This is our stretch goal. Stretch goal might be winning your age group. A primary goal might be top 10 or top 5, depending on the athlete. I'm curious because that way I'm always worried, like when you had your event and you had set that goal, you didn't achieve it. How do you avoid the athlete coming away from it with a sense of failure?
Yeah.
You want them to feel positive, right?
Yeah, totally. And maybe not positive, but like, you don't have to be like, you can be disappointed was what I wanted. It's okay to feel a bit of disappointment not hitting the goal. But to be honest, when it came to my race, I didn't win, but I felt like I won because, coming back to what you're saying, I set a couple different types of goals. You can compare it a bit to process versus outcome, but I call it your winning results versus your bonus results. I use the term result on purpose instead of goal. I use those, use both words, but mostly in my coaching I use the word result because I want to show our brains our abilities to create the results that we want based on the choices that we're making and the emotions that we're going after. So I have my athletes set what's called winning results, which are these skills that we want to adopt, these perspective changes, these ways of training that we can make progress towards in our training and also on race day. So that when we cross the finish line, no matter what the outcome is, we will have won something, right? For me, in Chattanooga, spoiler alert, I got second in my age group. I didn't win, but on that day, I had spent time. One of my winning results was working with my management of heat, but not just physically, but mentally as well. And my approach to heat training. I live in Bozeman, Montana, which is a tundra, like 8 months out of the year. And I was racing in Chattanooga, and it was actually snowing here in Bozeman when it was 105, very humid in Chattanooga when I was racing. So for me to be able to race the way that I did and come out second in my age group, I was like, I won this day. This is everything. So while my plaque says second, I crossed knowing that I put everything I could on that day. And so the disappointment wasn't something that held me back or I got down on myself about, if that makes sense.
It totally makes sense. I'm curious also when you talk about athletes and their self-doubt, where do you think that's coming from? Do you think it's innate? Do you think it's something that's learned? Why is that such a big component of what holds athletes back? And you're not the first person to tell me this. I had a conversation with Simon Marshall and Leslie Patterson, who wrote the book Brave Athlete.
It's right there on my bookcase.
They talk a lot about self-doubt and imposter syndrome and all of those things. And I'm curious if you think, or from your talking with clients and other athletes, are they coming with self-doubt that they've just always had, or is this something that they've learned from experience? Where do you think people are getting this?
I think that we often describe it as something we've always had. That's a thought that we have about it, but I believe that it's learned. Whether it's learned as children or as teenagers or as adults, it's learned based on our way of interacting in the world and our way of comparing ourselves to what we think we should be versus what we are, and also then comparing it to what we want to achieve, right? The most common limiting belief is not being good enough, right? And everyone defines good different, fast enough, skinny enough, better, whatever. And I believe that's learned. Absolutely. And so it can be unlearned, which is also really important.
Right. And they talk about that as well. And I want to go back just a little bit because just to my own experience as becoming a more proficient triathlete, I'm really fascinated by the fact that you just made this cognizant effort that I'm going to change. I'm going to change my approach, and I'm going to set my goal as winning my age group. And it's, but I mean, a lot of people from the outside could look at that and say, you haven't established yourself even in whatever, echelon of your age group. How is that not overconfidence, I guess is what I'm trying to say. Because I could think of my own experience and think how a lot of my sort of approach and thinking that, well, I'm not going to, win. I'm not going to be against these guys, because I would look and see what those other guys in my age group are doing for times. And I would look at my time and see the gap and realize that it just didn't seem like it was in the realm of possibility. I actually had to train harder to make myself faster, to start seeing that gap narrow, to start having the belief that I could get there. It seems like you flipped that on its head and actually took the belief before you saw the results. And I'm just curious how you think, how much do you think one versus the other, I guess is a long-winded, really complicated way of asking that question.
That's okay. I love this question because it's 100% one of the driving philosophies behind my coaching, is that you have to believe in yourself before the data results give you permission. 100%. 100%. But our natural tendency is to look to the data to be like, now we're ready. Now it's okay to believe in myself.
You want something that affirms your belief.
Yeah, you want the external validation. And so then we're always constantly searching for the external validation to tell us that we're ready.
Right. I guess I struggle with this kind of like I could have showed up at races all along and said, well, I'm going to have this as my goal. See that I didn't get it because I was just it wasn't realistic at the time. I needed to change the way I was training. I needed to change the way I was doing things to make it realistic.
Baseline. That's why I work with high achieving athletes, high performers already, because there's a certain baseline level. I'm not talking about like back of the packers, right? There's a certain baseline where now it's like the physical piece, or there's a piece that's already dialed in. And then from there, we're turning the dial to create that next level.
Right. To have them actually capitalize and leverage their physical talents by improving their mental outlook and their mental approach. Correct. So if someone wants to work with you, do they have to be coming from already a position of success?
No. And everyone defines success differently. It's really about their, how do I describe this? So I do consult calls. I do free consult calls with anyone that's interested. And in my consult call intake process, I ask a couple questions just to get some background. And so one of the questions that's imperative is that they've been a coached athlete for at least 3 years, because that shows me their buy-in, and that shows me that they're not putting mental energy into creating their own training program. Right? So that's one piece of it. And then from there, depending on what their goal is, what they've already achieved and what that gap is, then we look at that and we see what's been holding them back and how long they've been working towards that goal. Right? So there's a couple different pieces that are at play, and it's different for each person.
I think that's a great starting point. I love that question about have you been coached for 3 years, because I agree with you. People who spend a lot of time trying to do their own plan often are putting too much mental energy somewhere it doesn't belong.
Yes.
And then they know who to blame when they don't get the success. I guess that's one thing.
Yeah, that's one place that we put the blame. And it's such a powerful thing to have someone in your life that like you. I know you coach athletes as well, just to offload that and to build a sense of trust. Like that's a big piece of the coaching I do, is self-trust, and trust in yourself, trust in your program, and then releasing that bit of control to put that energy into the training that you're doing and your mental capacity.
Right. I want to finish off with one last question, and that is, I know it's branded on your site that you're a life coach. So I've heard this term before. Help me and my listeners who may not have heard this before. Tell us what a life coach is and how a life coach can help people reach success in other areas of their daily lives. Yeah.
So I think the best way for me to describe is to compare life coaching to therapy, because often that's like the biggest question I get, like, what's the difference? And therapy often focuses on what's happened in your life, your past, and how that's engineered kind of where you are now, like anything that you've gone through in your life, and you spend time dissecting that. Life coaching is about what you want to create in the future, where you want to go from where you are right now, and really focusing on making the best of the time that you have and making the choices in line with where you want to go. And so I have chosen to apply that into triathlon, right? What are the goals? How do you want to show up? What do you want to achieve on the race course? But it always spills to off the race course, because I believe so strongly that how you do one thing is how you do everything. So that's the best part about it. While I focus on triathlon, it becomes this whole life holistic approach, because it's one and the same. Everything we do on course always applies off course too.
That's great. I know you have to go. So just before we finish, just tell us about your podcast. And I will have the links for your podcast as well as your website in the show notes. But just quickly, maybe just give us a snapshot of what your podcast is about.
Sure. It's called the Train Your Mind podcast with Vanessa Faye Foerster. And what I do on the podcast currently, it's kind of changing a little bit, but I always commit to 15 to 20 minutes or less of my episodes. And what I do is I bring my concepts from my coaching and I put them on the podcast, and I try to dissect them in a way that anyone listening can get something out of it. It's my goal, whether you follow me on Instagram or listen to my podcast, that you have the ability to get mini transformation things that you can take into your training and have increase your own mental endurance. And so that's what you can expect from my podcast.
Awesome. Well, Vanessa, I can't thank you enough for your time today. I wish you the very best of luck this coming weekend. What's your goal?
Oh, I'm going for the win. I line up to win.
I feel like I knew what that answer was going to be, but I had to ask anyways.
Of course you did. I like it. I'll talk about it all day.
Well, I wish you the very best of luck. I will be tracking you along with some other folks that are going to be racing that day. And I'll hope that we will be meeting up in Kona next year because you will have secured that slot.
Oh, I already have it from 2019.
Oh, you have it? Well, then,
so I'll see you there.
Then we'll both be in Kona, and then we can look forward to talking more about mental endurance in a much nicer environment.
Thank you.
Thank you again for joining me today.
Okay, thanks, Jeff.
All right, take care.
Bye.
Bye-bye.